and welcome to another edition of Leopard Chat. I'm Laura Leopard. I'm speaking to you from Los Angeles today. We're going to be talking with Carl Reese of Reese Legal Search. Carl has been a recruiter since 1987. He's placed associates, partners, and counsels in the premier law firms and Fortune 500 companies nationally and internationally. And if you didn't know, he's also a guest columnist for the trade paper, the Los Angeles Daily Journal. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, well,
good to see you again.
Good to see you. Well, we're here to talk a little bit about the state of the market, and Carl is based in California, so we can talk about what it's like for attorneys in California who are seeking a job at this time.
Well, thanks for inviting me, first of all. It's been, as everyone knows, really challenging over the last 24 months with this turbulent, not only national, but sort of now global economic recessionary sort of craziness that's going on. And to that end, that clearly has impacted the private sector as well as the public sector, and the trickle down that the effect that it now has on law firms, and accordingly we as service providers to the law firms. Mm-hmm. To that end, it's been really challenging. We've seen, just to recap what you already know, major cutbacks in the ranks of associates in law firms, but all markets are fluid, for better or for worse, and to that end, there still are needs in certain practice areas. Mm-hmm. And so it's just my observation from working now at more the partner level, but also still having my hand in the pie of associate market, right. The shift in terms of where the needs are for specific types of associates. Mm-hmm. There's still opportunity there, although the bar has been raised significantly higher and expectations are much greater. Right. But yet there are still opportunities, not as many as we're used to have seen in maybe 2007, 2006. But when things pretty much hit a wall in 2008 and we're completely dead in 2009, we're now seeing a phoenix rising from the ashes.
Oh, excellent.
So there's hope. There's hope.
Well, you talked about some different practice areas that might be a little more hot than others. What are the practice areas to look at? Right?
We are seeing more momentum in the intellectual property arenas, patent IP attorneys. I always try to be proactive in terms of the sort of searches that we look to delve into. Mm-hmm. On the partner level, I try to look in areas that where we feel we've hit bottom and there's going to be an upside. At the associate level, I really think that to some end it's restructuring bankruptcy, mm-hmm. It's intellectual property. We're seeing certain aspects of litigation coming into play now, with sort of regulation starting to become more regulation, right. The end of deregulation, and then now the regulatory cycle ramping up. We're right. seeing areas like antitrust, mm-hmm. SEC-related right. Practice areas, litigation. These are all areas in terms of the associate ranks, ideally mid-level, mm-hmm. is where we're seeing there being a need. There's a rise.
So I've heard anything regulatory is really good right now.
Yes, this is corporate governance.
Exactly.
A lot of law firms that are dealing with national and public companies, we are getting the sense that law firms are saying if you have partners and or associates with skill sets in those areas, mm-hmm. there's an interest in if the level of competence is extremely high.
And what about, I've heard a little white-collar crime is also on
that
the rise.
As well. Yeah. Just a little bit. Yeah, white-collar crime, this is an area that we're seeing much more. With regard to California, it's interesting. We are noticing, certainly I've noticed, that there is more momentum in Northern California than in Southern California, which is really interesting. I'm speculating that part of that comes from the fact that we have a lot of startup companies in Northern California. That's where a lot of the venture capital is right. happening. So Silicon Valley and the Bay Area is where I've been focusing on.
So you're seeing more IP work going on in Northern California.
More so in the Silicon Valley and in the Bay Area than in Southern California. Although there is a lesser amount, but there are some opportunities that are presenting themselves. Certainly in the last, we're in mid 2010 now. I would say probably things started picking up in the end of the first quarter of 2010, and we're starting to get more opportunities. It's interesting.
Well, that's good.
It's
Yeah.
hopeful.
It is hopeful. I mean, we've certainly seen a rise in the number of job openings. You know,
Yes.
we're seeing a lot of jobs open up every day, so that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, what about those poor, unfortunate associates who don't happen to be or have experience in regulatory work and white-collar crime? What would you suggest for them if they're looking for
Well,
work?
I'm glad you asked, because about 8 weeks ago, I was invited, and this was the second annual, this was the second time I was invited by the LA Barristers Association to be in a panel to basically have a dialogue with the demographics of those demographics, students and or recent law school grads who have not had the opportunity to get work experience and are in third tier or fourth tier, technically, law firms, small firms where there might not necessarily be as much demand. And the challenge for them is how do they get in the door? How do they get experience so that they're competitive? And I guess we provide them with a number of suggestions in terms of how to maybe get ramped up and get work experience. 2 key points that I suggested was community service, volunteer work.
Right.
You never know when you volunteer on non-for-profit or on a board or or even volunteer on special events in your community, that one of your neighbors or one of the nonprofit board members may well be a key contact for a law firm, and it's happened where individuals have actually been fortunate to get short-term temporary work contract, and eventually some were actually hired as associates in smaller law firms. And
that's great.
So
that's great.
It's just creative alternatives to the traditional track of summer associate law, because that's not for everyone. That's a small pool of talent based on what we know.
Well, and it's smaller than it was before,
Yes.
too, because even the pools of summer associates are much smaller than they were in the past.
It's true.
So if you came from a third or fourth tier law firm, first of all, law school, you should be looking at smaller law firms for opportunities.
I would suggest that to be the case, because more than likely you're not going to be as competitive. If you didn't go to a top 20 law school and rank really high in your class, you're going to be at an immediate disadvantage. So be open, broaden the net. Not only that, I have suggested to individuals that may have attended and completed law school at a third tier law school to be open to other regions in the West. Maybe not only California, but Nevada, Arizona, and even the Midwest. There are actually more opportunities in the Midwest, so you have to be open to states like Wisconsin. And I made a joke with one of the at this barristers event where I made the lecture, and as it turned out, there was a fellow who was from there. I made a reference to Wisconsin, and there's more than cheese there. There's paper. There's a lot of industries that go on. So in the Midwest, there are actually a lot of opportunities in the Nebraskas and Iowa.
That's great.
And so you have to be open to not only law firms on the West Coast, but in-house opportunities, mid-sized companies that are Midwest-based. And that's a good way to ramp up, get work experience, and eventually maybe you can transition back. Or you may find that the opportunity is so great there that you may not want to, in the short term, come back and build your career there.
So in other words, be flexible.
Flexibility is key.
Flexibility is key. That's right. Well, Carl, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Much. And if anyone has a question for Carl, you can go to their website at Reese Legal Search and send him an email. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for joining us today on Leopard Chat.